Sev Omnis, and in this video I'll explain Ukrainian lost media iceberg V1. So, let's go! Shield and Sword. Shield and Sword is a Soviet four-part military drama feature film about the exploits of Soviet intelligence officers during the Great Patriotic War. Filmed in 1967 by director Vladimir Besov based on the novel of the same name by Vadim Kozhevnikov. There was also a Ukrainian dubbing, but due to Romani propaganda, it disappeared. Fortunately, status fully lost. The Tetralogy by Khotkevich describes the biography and work of Taras Shevchenko. The Tetralogy by Khotkevich describes the biography and work of Taras Shevchenko. It also describes the Kobzar's difficult and sometimes impoverished childhood, as well as how he could sometimes go against fate. Fortunately or unfortunately, only a part of all the manuscripts have been preserved, which are mostly used for printing in the form of books. Status partly lost. VeggieTales Ukrainian dubbing. VeggieTales was known in Ukraine as Vegetable Stories. The dubbing was created around 1996 to 2006 and was distributed on VHS and DVD. The dubbing was also broadcast on the new channel in 1996 to 2000 and Plus in 2006 to 2009. If you decide to Google it, you can understand that computer graphics were used to make this animated series. Yes, it's pretty corny, but it still visually has meme potential if it weren't for the status fully lost. Zlива. This film, Etchings to the History of the Haidamok Region, is a Ukrainian silent historical drama film by Ivan Kavaleradze and based on the poem Haidamok by Taras Shevchenko. In the film itself, Kavaleradze developed a unique visual system, a synthesis of sculpture and cinematography, the formative element of which was light. A special musical score was commissioned for the film, the author of which was composer Pavlo Tolstyakov. About the plot, this was one of the first interpretations by Ivan Kavaleradze of the poem Haidamok by Taras Shevchenko. This film adaptation vividly depicted pages in the history of the Ukrainian people, the Koliv region, the peasant uprising of 1768 led by Maxim Zalizniak and Ivan Gunta. Status fully lost. Mobile kiosk. To put it briefly, this is a section from the aforementioned QTV. There you simply had to send an SMS to the number that was shown on the screen. In a sense, it all worked like an online ringtone service. At the same time, WW was shown. Status fully lost.
Ось така у нас хуйня, малята. Добраніч.
The first Did Panas radio shows 1950 to 1962. In the first part, I mentioned this program, but the only point that I had not talked about before was the radio format, which existed for 11 years. It is the version that existed in 1951 to 1962. Some of the plausible tales of Grandfather Panas can be heard in Mykola Amasov's radio blog Golden Fund of Ukrainian Radio. At the same time, Amasov falsely stated that Nelidov began writing tales only in 1952, that Grandfather Panas performed for some time until April 1951. And this is evidenced by the cartoon of Nelidov Frankel, published in issue 8 of the magazine Perez, April 1951. Status fully lost. Hamburg. Germany, 1923, hunger, devastation, and strikes after the First World War. Workers called to fight by the communist Nils Unger seized the entire arsenal of weapons and turned every building into a fortress. The Social Democrat Buk disobeys Unger's order to blow up the bridge over the Elbe, and Reichswehr troops enter the city. A full-scale massacre begins. Nils Unger himself is arrested. Buk is tied to the enemy's assistant means and betrays the rebels during interrogation. The rebels stand trial. To avoid political publicity during the trial, Nils Unger is declared mentally ill, but he manages to escape. And again his call "Take up your rifles" is heard on the streets of Hamburg. The film was based on the book Hamburg on the Barricades by Larissa Reisner. The film premiered on November 16, 1926 in Kiev, but the film has been partially preserved. Status partly lost. Natalka Poltavka from 1936. Наталка Poltavka is a Ukrainian feature film directed by Ivan Kavalerets. It was shot in 1936 at the Ukraine Film Studio and remade in 1969 at the Odavzinko Film Studio. The film is based on the play of the same name by Ivan Kotlyarevsky. In Ukraine, it is the first film in which a phonogram was used. 75 years later, Ukr.Poshta issued thematic stamps. Still, this film has a rather respectable anniversary. Those stamps have numbers 1132 and 1133. Status: fully lost. Transformers: Victory Ukrainian dubbing. If it's too short, here's Transformers, which was released around 1996, but the Ukrainian voice acting hasn't been particularly preserved. Status: fully lost. Little Shoes 1-9-8. This film was created based on the story of M. Gogol the Night Before Christmas. Short description of this film. To justify the fantastic side of the adventures of the blacksmith Vakula, the authors of this film slightly simplify Gogol's plot. The blacksmith Vakula, having drunk himself a lot at the rut, quickly falls asleep. And he dreams that the evil one takes him to the royal palace, all the way to St. Petersburg, and that there he, an ordinary blacksmith from Ukraine, personally pulls off the Russian empress's shoes to give them to his fiancée Oksana. But in reality, the drunken Vakula pulls off the shoes from the feet of the rat in a dream, who got him drunk to such a state. And so, when Vakula is already obviously unwrapping his package with royal shoes in front of Oksana, he realizes that he stole the dirty shoes of the rat. The film premiered on February 13, 1928 in Kiev. Status: fully lost. S.T.A.L.K.E.R Build 1666. Warning about information. It is better not to repeat the below-mentioned things from the game legally and illegally to protect your health and not have problems with Ukrainian legislation. According to all urban legends, Build 1666 is the result of a collective experiment, which was held at the dacha of Yavorsky, head of the PR department of the GSC Game World Company, and the entire GSC company, with the help of ayahuasca and a complex of Toltec death rituals. During the process, anomalous phenomena occurred: levitation, pyrokinesis, and random generation of space-time tunnels. If anything, there will be some moments from the gameplay of S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl so that you understand the atmosphere of the game. This is probably about the build for S.T.A.L.K.E.R Oblivion Lost, which is lost media in this way. When I decided to look at the gameplay, it was similar to S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl, but you must understand the difference between the dates, in the sense that the cancelled version could have appeared 20 years before the second part, but at the same time there was a beta version for Shadow of Chernobyl, which was released in March 2007. This build has become an urban legend in a sense, all because materials that were not real appeared on the network. There were quite interesting creepy stories about how fans and testers went crazy. Their computers supposedly died because their characters died. I warn you, do not repeat what will happen next. One of the possible legends claims that from the messages of some anonymous players, there were moments when they communicated with supernatural entities who had bad ideas about them. They meant dark rituals, and that 11 people disappeared for no reason. After half a year, 3 people appeared online. Perhaps 7 people probably disappeared due to the above-mentioned cruel actions. Most readers thought that those 3 had lost their minds, and that is why they decided to do it. They decided to take their own lives because of their emotional state. However, an advertising integration of Mindly or similar platforms for finding psychologists, psychotherapists, or psychiatrists would be good here so that there would be no such thoughts in the future. How could you understand that this build does not exist? Just a piece of advice for the future. It is better to download the necessary games from official programs and sites. All for your safety. This is so that you do not have problems with the law of your country in the future. S.T.A.L.K.E.R Polundra. S.T.A.L.K.E.R Polundra is a silent film that was created at the VUFKU. Its premiere took place on October 15, 1928 in Kiev. If we talk about the plot, then it tells about the subversive activities of a white guard at a meteorological station, which was located in a rather difficult region of the Caucasus. When all three were at that station, there was a terrible snowfall in the mountains, and therefore they were covered in a huge amount of snow. Escaping from this situation, Nesterenko accidentally finds a student intern who is a communist. Due to the fact that the meteorological station is cut off from the outside world due to this situation, it turned out to be somewhat absurd with drama. All because Malinin hides all the products at the station, and Chubovo went on a dangerous hike for himself for the sake of help. At the same time, Malinin has a conflict that escalates into a fight with Galina, and because of this, she hits him. But why did he decide to start a conflict? In the end, it's straight meat. All because Got runs to the station, and at that time, wolves attack him and ate him. Later, Galina confesses her love to Malinin. Although she had previously friend-zoned him in the plot, here is a description of the plot. Unfortunately, the film has not been preserved so that I could describe it in a little more detail. Therefore, the status is fully lost. Benefit of the Clown George. About the plot of this film. In one of the units of the Red Army, a Red Army soldier named Georgy Bublikov serves. He was a clown transformer with the nickname George. It is in his unit that he is considered quite bad because he has such traits in his nature as honesty and courage. Because of this, the head of his department kills it in him. Also, the scoundrel decides to use his professionalism in clowning so that George can complete a responsible and at the same time difficult task. That is why it was George who was decided to send George to the White Army in order to steal specific documents. The fulfillment of this task gives George every opportunity to break through the front with the least human losses. In the battle itself, during the breakthrough, the scoundrel, who decided to give that task to George, dies. Because of this, the Red Army soldiers fall into despair. Suddenly, a familiar figure of a commander appears to them. Then they hear his voice, and without further ado, they go on the attack. Later, they realize that it was the same clown George's, and that with his talent he could give commands to his unit as a commander, but he was lost during the battle as a soldier. Then he is buried as a private Red Army soldier, Georgy Bublikov. Such a plot was invented by Alexander Soloviev. Although I decided to look at a little more information, and it turned out that there is propaganda and that they started working on this film on June 28, 1928 and finished on December 3rd of the same year. Tom's premiere in Kiev took place on February 19, 1929. At the same time, the film was not preserved and therefore the status GTA Sumy. In short, this is one of the GTA packs, but the Sumy map was planned there, but it was not released. Status unreleased. Politotriad 1930. I decided to look for at least some information about the Politotriad of 1930, but still, it just feels like a status fully lost. Zacher Burkett. If anything, I will not talk about films with a similar name, which were released in 1971 and 2019 of the film I will describe. Although a couple of these films were made based on the book of the same name by Ivan Franko. Here I will describe the film of 1929. Mikola Juria. Mikola Juria is a film that was made by the same Josip Rona, but together with Mark Tereshchenko, and was released in 1926. This film was based on the socio-everyday story by Ivan Nechailevitsky, which he dedicated to Lysenko. He had a wife named Maria. The two of them had a son together, whom they named Mikola. Mikola fell in love with a girl from a poor family named Naimodora, who worked as a hired hand. How can you further understand that there was a folk line there, and also that there were moments such as the conflict between parents and children, and therefore the prevailing themes that are still relevant today? Status fully lost. Marika. I'll answer in advance, this is not about me, because I was born in 2005. Yes, this video was released on my birthday. Guys, I'm about this. I'm about a film from 1926. As usual, it's VUFKU. About the plot of this film. In the early years of the NEP, it was the early 1920s in countries which were under Soviet occupation. One of the committees for aid to the starving evacuated an orphan girl named Marійka from a hungry village to the city. Along the way, Marійka runs away. At first, life brings her together with Filka, an old tramp. In a sense, he became a stepfather to her. Then the girl ends up with Klavdia Ivanovna, the keeper of a den of thieves, who mercilessly exploits the girl, involving her in a dirty case that fails. The gang members became mad at this situation. The main character is in danger. The girl's acquaintance, a cigarette seller, finds out about this and contacts the police. The thieves are arrested. Marійka is accepted into a pioneer detachment. There, over time, the girl is found by her big sister Katya, a factory worker. The film premiered on April 26, 1926. It was sold for distribution in the RSFSR Kino, but has not survived. I was surprised because the premiere of this film took place 60 years before the explosion at the 4th power unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Status: fully lost. Blaze the Trail. Blaze the Trail is a Ukrainian film that was shot in the 1920s. It was directed by Pavla Dolina. According to the plot, in one of the Ukrainian villages, poor peasants led by Stepan Voyko, who was also the head of the village council at that time, decide to create an agricultural artel because they decided that they should not be offended. The peasants who were in this village were much wealthier and were against it, and this is logical. The village meeting breaks up and the opponents of the artel steal grain, set fire to the barn, and blame the head of the village council for everything. In principle, as always, at first they are lazy, and then they do it. During a search of Voyko's estate, they really find bags of grain, but the peasants do not want to believe in the crime of their head and they look for the guilty. They are arrested. A collective farm is formed in the village. Against the background of social events in the film, the love story of Stepan Voyko and the farmhand Irina unfolds. The script of the film was approved by the Supreme Council of the Ukrainian SSR Protocol No. 4248 on May 27, 1928, although this is not surprising because the Soviet occupation of Ukraine. Filming of the film began on the 1st of September 1928, ended on the 10th of December 1928. The premiere of the film took place on the 9th of January 1929. To this day, the film has not been preserved. Status: fully lost. Tрофим Лемиш after 1918. Tрофим Lemish is one of Mykola Kulish's novels written after 1918. It probably disappeared due to several historical reasons in Ukraine. Status: fully lost. Deprived of the Day or Without the Sun is one of the films by Vladimir Baluzek, released in 1927. To briefly about this film. A social drama that describes the moral rebirth of people after the October Revolution. Fortunately, this film was not shown in the Soviet Russia. Status: fully lost. Deprived of the Day. Deprived of the Day or Without the Sun is one of the films by Vladimir Baluzek, released in 1927. To briefly about this film. A social drama that describes the moral rebirth of people after the October Revolution. Fortunately, this film was not shown in the Soviet Russia. Status: fully lost. Deprived of the Day or Without the Sun is one of the films by Vladimir Baluzek, released in 1927. To briefly about this film. A social drama that describes the moral rebirth of people after the October Revolution. Fortunately, this film was not shown in the Soviet Russia. Status: fully lost. The Pearl of Semiramis. The Pearl of Semiramis is one of the films from the VuFKU Film Factory. It was released in 1929. To put it briefly, it is about the history, and maybe in some cases the myths about the founding of Odessa, because Ukraine needed a similar city at that time. The film has not survived. But before that, the premiere occurred on March 29, 1929 in Kyiv. Status: fully lost. Fiery Revenge. Fiery Revenge, although it has such names as Balatyany Oni and Chorny Buro, is a film from 1930. By the way, this film has not one director, but two at once, namely Mitro Erdman, Victor Biazzi. About the plot of this film, in the village of Policia called Bystrivka, famous for its pottery, the Red Army soldier Gavrin returns after the war. Together with him, a pottery instructor Polishchuk comes to the village. They quickly form an artel. This is not liked by the actual owners of the pottery industry of Bystrivka, Volinsky and all his relatives. If it is too short, then it was a rather bloody battle. After an article about this rather bloody event appears in the regional newspaper, all the arsonists find themselves on trial. The premiere took place on April 8, 1930, but the film itself has not survived. Status: fully lost. Fresh Wind. Fresh Wind is another film from the VUFKU, released in 1927. If we talk about the plot, a demobilized Red Army soldier nicknamed Bratchik returns to one of the villages where fishermen lived. Outraged by the accounting of the dealer Sava Spira, Bratchik convinces all possible fishermen not to sell fish to Sava. Nevertheless, Sava persuades a smuggler nicknamed Adnuki in order to spare Bratchik his life. At the same time, those persuaded fishermen find out about the whole conspiracy, and because of this Sava is arrested. After this incident, they form a fishing artel headed by Bratchik. The premiere of the film took place January 18, 1927 in Kiev. The film was not saved. Status: fully lost. So this video is going to the end. Don't forget about like and subscribe for next part. Bye and stay safe.